Greetings, friends. Welcome to another one of our Friday community classes right here on the Green Art channel. This week, we are going to be doing a little bit of a book tour or a book review, I guess. Folks always asking me about good books to read, so we're going to talk about a few. And in fact, I'm going to start out today's class with a joke. And the joke is that I'm going to try to talk about 7 books in under 15 minutes, right? So the joke is that that's not going to be possible with me, right? So before we start, I want to present you with this idea, something to chew on, something to contemplate, and that is that our journey on the plant spirit path, whatever form it may take, there are sort of two parallel ways of walking the plant spirit path. And in a lot of ways, they intersect and they weave. And sometimes they're a little more distinct and a little more separated, but both of them are important and they're going to come up in our conversation today. So I want to start with this, and I don't know that this is something we've talked about before in another class, so this could be super cool. And that is that we can consider the plant spirit path as being sort of freeform, plant lore informed, based on our personal connections to the plants, based mostly on what we learn directly from the plants, right? So we're kind of doing this eclectic, organic, intuitive work with the plant spirits, and I consider that a very valid modern expression of a plant spirit path. And then on the other hand, we have a plant spirit path that might be rooted in a specific spiritual tradition or a specific cultural tradition, and that is also incredibly valid. Now, for me, I think I do both pretty close to 50-50. You know, I work almost exclusively with plant spirits and my herb-wise ancestors and certain old deities who are related to plant spirit work, right? So I'm pretty focused on what I do. And I always take what the plants teach me as more important than what anybody else says about the plants, right? I always say this, that the plants are the greatest expert on plants. So for me, that's a pretty organic, intuitive, plant spirit path. For lack of a better term, we could say that it's visionary or shamanic. And I don't like using that term. We have to use it again later today, but you know why if you've been around, and you know I'm just using it as a placeholder, right, for a bigger conversation. So we appreciate the word exists for that fact. But also, a big amount of the work that I do is rooted in ancestral cultural lore, specifically Anglo-Saxon, Wortcunning, pagan traditions, and of course the Welsh traditions of plant spirit work. So I draw from both sources, and I have to find ways to reconcile them and dovetail them together. Most of the time it's pretty effortless. Sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes I have to lean into the academia. Sometimes I have to step back and take a break from things and really figure out what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, where the information is coming from. It's never effortless, but sometimes there's ease, which is nice. So the reason I wanted to start with that is because some of the books that I'm going to share with you today have specific cultural, aspects to them, and some of them don't. So we're going to try to move through them quickly. The point is not to do full exhaustive book reviews. I actually have full reviews on a couple of these books on the channel. So it's worth going and looking for book reviews. It's more to introduce you to each of these books, to maybe help you build a little wish list for the year ahead, and to also introduce you to some of my personal sources for the things that I talk about when it's coming from, a specific author or teacher or a specific academic stream or a specific cultural tradition, and not from my own direct work with the plants. So let's see how quickly we can get through these books. The first one that I'm going to start with, and actually, I'm going to mention too before we go, this list I put together, it's very hard for me to choose books, right? I could have done 100, no joke. It almost becomes a little bit random, right? Like, I'm just going to get these ones. These are books that I think are essential for people who want to do plant spirit work. I don't really care what cultural context you're practicing from, what plants you're working with, where you live in the world, what your bioregional herbal allies. I chose these books because I believe they can be helpful to everybody, right? Even the ones that have specific cultural aspects can be inspiring and edifying to people not part of that culture, right? So caveat, we'll start there. So we're going to begin with a book that has a full book review on my channel somewhere. This is The Herbal Lore of Wise Women and Wortcunners by Wolf Storrell, and I love this book. It is packed with information. There's a lot about Western herbal traditions. There's a lot about humoral traditions. There's a lot about astrology in here, which is not really my thing, but it's there. And the author of this book, Wolf Storrell, really does an incredible job at presenting not so much the historical trappings of what wort cunning may have looked like, but what the information that we have could look like in a modern context, what we can do with the information right now. So I would say that of all the books we're going to talk about today, this is the one I would start with. If you don't have this book in your library, please pick it up. It's lovely. By the way, I'm going to put links to every book down below so you can go grab them and support the channel at the same time. So Wolf Storrell, The Herbal Lore of Wise Women and Wortcunners. It's also got some really great illustrations, and there's a lot of medicinal and magical stuff in here together, which you know I love. The next one we are going to talk about is rooted in a specific cultural tradition, and that is Leechcraft, Early English Charms, Plant Lore and Healing by one of my favorite authors, Stephen Paulington. This book also has a full book review on the channel. And as the name implies, this book is rooted in Anglo-Saxon plant lore, of which there is so much. In fact, I don't know of any, especially Northern and Western European animist pagan tradition with this much surviving plant lore than the Saxon stuff. So again, even if you have nothing to do with this culture, it's a great read. It's going to inspire you, give you some ideas. There's so many charms in here, recipes, workings. There's also, and this is the reason I really love this book so much. First, Stephen has taken the time to do a full Old English Materia Medica that makes sense for our minds, right? It's laid out and indexed in a way that Materia Medica are indexed these days, and that's very hard. Some of the other books we're going to talk about, they don't have that, right? Next, he has his translations, and he is an Anglo-Saxon scholar, of the Lachnunga manuscript, which is where we get the Nigon Wirta Galder, the 9 herbs charm, which I talk about all the time. It's got the Old English Herbarium Manuscript 5 and a translation of Bald's Leech Book, right? So this is a very, very good reference book to have just for those translations, but the beginning part where the author talks about Leechcraft, and leech is the physical body, right? It's our physical body that comes from the earth, is nourished by the earth, and returns to the earth in Anglo-Saxon philosophy. And so this book really focuses on caring for the physical body, but there's so much magic in there as well. Really, if you're nerdy about the Anglo-Saxon stuff, read everything by Stephen Paulington. So Leechcraft, Stephen Paulington. The next one, here's where we get to use that S word again, and here's where we're veering out of my particular cultural roots, right, and into something that's not mine, but something that still adds so much richness, so much texture and perspective to my work, because we can approach it respectfully, right? We don't have to approach it in a way that we're going to steal it and repackage it and misappropriate it. We can see it for what it is. We can see our own work reflected in it and have that strengthen and edify, right, and brighten our own work. When we learn from the plant spirit traditions of other people in a respectful way, it is a tonic to our plant spirit work, period, right? So that's the big thing. This is Plant Spirit Shamanism. It's by Ross Heaven and Howard Charing. I actually have read pretty much everything Ross Heaven has written or wrote while he was alive, and I've always appreciated it. You know, he is not somebody who's indigenous to the rainforest or to Central or Southern America, but he was invited in and welcomed in by many different groups of people and taught lots of really great things and has distilled this information in a way that makes sense to me. And I just really appreciate being able to have a glimpse into the way that various people that he talks about practice plant spirit work. He has another book that I could have easily added to this list, which is the Sin Eater book. And the Ross Heaven Sin Eater book, incredible, talks about his time studying with a Welsh sin eater, Welsh cunning man. So he's kind of all over the place, but he's always talking about plants. And I really, really love this book. It's not a big one, but it's a good one. We're going to move on to another book with a full book review on the channel and an interview with the author, and that is The Plant Spirit Familiar by Christopher Penczak. Christopher Penczak is, of course, a prolific author. He is the founder of the Temple of Witchcraft tradition. He is a traditional witchcraft practitioner. And although I don't consider myself a witch and I don't consider myself someone who practices witchcraft, here's an example of me being able to read and study a book that doesn't really have anything to do with me specifically and respect it, see it for what it is, recognize that maybe it wasn't written for me, but I can still appreciate it and I can still find so much wisdom and inspiration in this book. And Christopher is just a lovely person. So go find that interview, that chat that we had. As you can see, my copy is very well worn because there's pretty incredible stuff in this book. So if you are of the witchy bend, this book should be in your library. I will link to it below. If not, buy this book anyway. This is a irreplaceable, bit of reference for me on my library, and one that I love. I think people might be a little surprised that I love this book so much, but I love this book so much. Next up, we're going to do one of the older ones. This is Charles Montgomery Skinner's Myths and Legends of Flowers, Trees, Fruits, and Plants in All Ages and Climes, right? It's a big book, big title, and this is one of the many books that the original has fallen out of copyright, so people are able to reproduce it. And thankfully, because the original with the original script font is very hard to read and very tiny, this one I will be, will say the script is quite small. So if you have some visual impairment, if you wear reading glasses, you might struggle with this a little bit. You might need a little extra something. There are some words in here that I've got to get the loupe out, and look at them. So that being said, here's an example of a book that is a representation of a bunch of mostly European plant lore, all kinds of trees and plants and flowers, stories around them, myths around them, how people saw them, how they related to certain festivals and certain times of the year, bits of magic, bits of medicine. And you may not, with any of these books, take what's said about the herb at face value, right? And say, oh, the book says bay leaf is good for this and does this and does this. The point that I bring this up and the reason I refer people to some of these books is not to take them verbatim, but to learn how to think about plants. To say, if these people ancestrally are talking about plants in this way, how am I talking about plants? If they're relating to and experiencing the virtues of plants in this way, what does that look like for me? So you can flip through this. It's not A to Z, but it's not A to Z perfectly. The intent was A to Z index, but there's some wonkiness with some of the plants. And you can read, all about various different plants and the folklores, and you can be inspired by it for those individual plants. It can be a great way to add, research and depth to your work with an individual plant, but also learn how to think about the plants. Another one that I love, this was like a last minute grab on the way out the door this morning, was Discovering the Folklore of Plants by Margaret Baker. It's a cute, tiny little book, but it's packed with so much stuff. And similar to the one before and the one that will come next, this is a compendium, an A to Z of all kinds of plants, mostly European tradition, and just stories. You know, this plant has this lore around it, this taboo around it, was used in this way, had a relationship with this deity or this time of year. And again, we can use this to deepen our relationship with individual plants, but we can also use these kinds of books to start thinking this way about plants. So this one I would really want somebody to have in their bookshelf if they were walking any iteration of a plant spirit path, especially something rooted in really any of the Indo-European traditions, because there's some plant lore in here that's coming from other places besides Northern and Western Europe. Very, very nice to be able to say, oh, I'm working with this particular herb right now. These are the books that I would want to go say, what does the book have reference? You know, what is the folklore that's there? How can I connect poetically to this plant to deepen? So it's a very good book. Last but not least, we're making great time. Plant Lore Legends and Lyrics. This is Richard Folklore, of course, right? And this is one of my favorite books and a text that I refer to constantly. You can see it's heavily marked and well worn. This is an example, again, of a book that has fallen far out of copyright. I believe Folklore originally released this book in 1900, so lots of different people have republished it and reprinted it. I'll try to give you a little peek inside at the teeny tiny text. It's very small text. This one is very frustrating because the plant section is not A to Z. Some of the names of the plants are not the names we use, so it requires secondary research and referencing to figure stuff out. But the presentation of story is so good. There's such great stories in here, referring to everything from Norse plant lore to Indian plant lore, Southeast Asia Indian plant lore, to everything in between, right? Very kind of pan-Indo-European. So many good stories. This is an incredible reference book. I've read this start to finish many, many, many times over and have sort of worked on my own indexing system for the book to find things and to re-reference things that I like because it's a little haphazard. But this, I would say, in this collection of 7 books, this would be in the top 3 that I would want on somebody's bookshelf who is serious about doing plant spirit path work. So there's 7 for you right there. If I were to add 2 more, just for funsies, that I don't have in my hand right now, I would add some good translation of the Meddygon Myddfai, the Welsh, probably the strongest existing Welsh materia medica of plant spirit charming and plant medicine. And I would add my own book, The Green Art, right? That's the second book that I wrote, and it really is a look at my particular practice of plant spirit work. So you could add 2 more to your book list if you want. I will link to all of those below. So a couple books to get you started. I could do 10 more versions of this class, maybe I will, and share more books with you. Again, there's a bunch of book reviews on the channel that you can go look at. If you have one book that you would never want to be without, that is your most referenced plant book, for whatever reason you reference it, that has been the most inspirational for you in your work with the plants, please take a moment, drop it down in the comments below, tag the author if you know if they have a YouTube channel or whatever, give them a tag. Let's show some love to these people that have taken time to write these books and preserve this wisdom. And let's see if we can get to 25 books maybe in total would be pretty cool. And hopefully I'll find some books from you guys that I don't have yet that I can go find. Thanks very much for being here, guys. I'll see you soon.